now going to move on to some work that's been happening in the background for a considerable period of time, and that's the collaboration behind new training. So there were two presenters in this session. First is Sara Merckel, Chief CEO of NHIA. Sara is the CEO and brings more than a decade worth of experience in advocating and promoting the importance of herd improvement sector to the Australian dairy and beef industries. With a business administration background, her primary focus is membership services and stakeholder engagement. Sara is passionate about listening to industry players and making sense of the key issues as she can develop effective strategies for solutions which make a real difference. And having a little past experience in her space is also trying to manage a board that has their good and bad days, as Anthony, wherever you are, as the current chair may understand. Joining Sara is April Browne, and April is the lead learning and development partners within Dairy Australia and has been a tremendous assistance so far today. April has been involved in the education in the agricultural sector for a duration of her career, working across secondary schools, tertiary education and at industry level. April also runs a dairy farm business with a partner based in Camden, New South Wales, where they milk a mixed breed herd of about 300 cows. April has a particular motivation for supporting the development of a sustainable and capable agricultural workforce as a key driver of profitable farm businesses. To achieve this, April's led the development of a range of new and innovative approaches to learning for the dairy industry. These include co-creation of higher education offerings such as graduate diploma of agribusiness, dairy management, and the integration of simulation education experiences for artificial insemination training. And I'm sure they're going to refer to a certain object sitting over in the corner. Sara and April welcome the opportunity to share their experience in learning and development for growing the animal health and welfare capability of the dairy workforce at this conference. Please welcome them to the stage.
Thanks, Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. Can anyone tell me what you think the average age of the Australian dairy farmer is? 68? Let's go in 2020. 53. 2021? 54? 53. 2022? 54. I would have liked to have used the service industry ages, but the farmers' data was available. But I think we'd be similar. Do you agree? No? What would we say it is? 49, 40. I can say, I think we could say it's an ageing industry. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could bring that age down into, say, the mid-40s? And I think we can get there with bringing new young people into industry. There has been a gap in AI training, therefore a lack of younger skilled people coming through. This has meant we have had to rely on overseas workers when we should be able to service our own industry. So what have been the problems? Why don't they stick it out? Is it because of the hours? The volume of cows that need to be done at times? Why is finding competent staff an issue? I would love your wish list on what a thriving business looks like with trained staff in your organisation, if training wasn't an issue. So you can let me know in the question time or come and have a chat to me later on. Quality AI technicians are needed more than ever. With the average herd size growing, The typical Australian dairy herd has tripled in size in the past 3 decades. In 2020, the average herd size was 303 cows. Quality technicians are needed to offer farmers the best advice on heat detection, bull selection, better semen handling techniques, better conception rate, and the ability to do a larger number of cows, like fixed-time insemination. Some really hard work has been going on behind the scenes with Dairy Australia and a group of partnered TAFEs and training bodies to make training more accessible. This is due to the shortage of training available and to be proactive about giving a solution for industry. There is a high demand of people needing training, and what April will take you through is the new levels of fundamentals course that can have a pathway to NHIA's professional accreditation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I guess I'd like to start here today by just reflecting a little bit back on a couple of years ago. I wasn't here at Herd 21, but my colleagues, Professor Felicity Blackstock and Dr. Steph Bullen were here. And for any of you that were here as well, you might remember that they talked about partnerships for education and the opportunities that exist for the dairy industry to actually look at other providers of education and how we might work with them to create new learning experiences and address some of the gaps that we have in terms of training for our situation. And I think it was quite timely that Barry this morning also made the comment that knowledge is everywhere, because I do think we do sometimes need to look outside our own bubble at some of these types of providers, whether they be formal education like universities or TAFE partners and vocational education, to some of the non-accredited training that's offered through extension and through our private service provision, and how that complements the work experience that we have and the life experience that we have. So today I'm here to talk to you about some of the work we have been doing in partnerships, working with the vocational education sector and the dairy industry to actually create a new curriculum for AI training. And that need, I suppose, and why I'm here talking about that, has sort of been driven by a couple of different factors. And AI had been on the radar as an opportunity for training partnerships in, I guess, for a couple of years now within Dairy Australia, and certainly in our conversations with NHIA. And what transpired, I suppose, and we recognised fairly quickly that there's been this consistent decline in the quality of training nationally when it comes to AI. And that's not to say that there are not fantastic providers out there of AI training, but the consistency and availability of that training was really starting to decline, to the point where we were seeing a lot of farmers in places where the market had thinned quite significantly, travelling several hours, travelling interstate and actually travelling internationally to do basic AI training. And that wasn't going to be a sustainable option for our industry moving forward. So we had to look at, well, what could we do to create new training options that were accessible and also had a really good quality learning experience around them, and how we actually govern that. And probably the third element that started to become more and more prevalent in the past few years is the conversation around social licence, and particularly ethics. When it comes to any kind of training with live animals, that's always going to be a conversation, but it's certainly come to the fore in the past few years. And so we wanted to have a level of being able to have oversight over that as well. And that's what's led us to a place of having a national curriculum. So what was developed in the past sort of 12 months and is now available across the country, I'll show you some of the providers in a minute, but what was developed was this national curriculum that composed 3 main parts really. And the first one is around online learning modules. And we recognised that accessibility was going to be an issue regardless of where we housed these training opportunities. And it was also, this project was happening during COVID, so there was an opportunity to look at the role that online learning could actually play. And so the theory component that may have traditionally been pen and paper in the classroom has actually translated into an online learning experience that people can do before they come to the practical training session. And this then complements what they do when they come on farm or to the training facility. There was also a complete rewrite of the AI manual produced by NHIA, and that was a really big piece of work, but an incredibly important piece of work, because since it had been rewritten previously, huge changes had happened around biosecurity, as Debbie sort of alluded to today. Changes around ethics requirements were particularly something that we wanted to highlight, and changes to technical practice was also something that needed updating. So having that manual, and if you can have time to have a look at it during the breaks, I'd really encourage you to. It's a great resource to underpin actually this national curriculum. I always get asked, well, who's actually delivering the training? So we've always worked well, I think, with the vocational education sector as an industry, but it's been a little while since we've had such a consolidated network of providers come together for a particular focus on a certain type of training. And this project was really revolutionary in some ways, in not only providing a really up-to-date course, but actually bringing together this group of providers. And the other thing I think that's really interesting is it's brought together both the public vocational education system and the private sector there, with Orion Training servicing New South Wales and Queensland. And that's something, again, that hasn't been done in recent times. So for dairy and education moving forward, it's quite nice to have, I guess, built a bit of a model here of what future training partnerships could look like within vocational education, and how we can get a more collective approach to actually improving accessibility of training throughout the industry, not just with AI, but potentially moving forward to address some of the other training issues that we have. Now, Sara, if you can tell us what comes next. That's the baseline curriculum.
Thank you. And with that partner network, the ones that have already launched their courses, there's already a wait list with their courses when they've just launched them. So there's a lot of people that are going to be coming through. We do expect to see a strong pipeline where we can imagine a world where we get to that age where we are closer to 40s in our industry, and have a pool of people that can be accessed where needed rather than struggling to find people. Looking ahead, we will need to review a level 2 type training. Once the new entry-level fundamentals course is complete and these technicians have entered the industry, they see if they like the job, they can do the job, they then need to practice on more cows. Right now, we send technicians overseas for this type of training. So we are also looking to model something here in Australia within those partner networks, which gets students into a larger number of cows. So how can Australia model something similar, given our animal ethics is very strict? This is being reviewed. What else is next? NHIA is bringing something new to industry. It is developing a herd improvement learning hub. So what is that? That is a one-stop shop for all your training needs. Just to have a look at what the homepage looks like on the screen there. It'll become a huge resource for industry. It'll house some of the material that the partner networks use to train the entry-level course that members can have access to, that students can then use to then partner with those TAFEs that are teaching the course. There will be job opportunities housed in there, specifically for new entrants who are keen to come into industry but they're not sure what to do. NHIA can then link them with a member's business and really grab onto those new people that want to come into industry. Just go back. And then there'll also be a jobs board and a resource tool for industry. So at the moment, there's an overload of information everywhere. You might not remember where you saw something. So we're looking at bringing that into a centralised hub where you can search for topics of interest just by the click of a button. So I'd like to work with those people in industry that have something to add into the hub as well, so we can include that as a one-stop shop for all sorts of resources. The other thing that NHIA will relaunch this year is advanced AI accreditation. So how do technicians get this? So this is an advanced level. So technicians need to do 500 inseminations per year under the supervision of a qualified person or service provider. They need to be nominated by their employer. They need to then sit an exam that sits on the hub. Once they've sat that exam, they'll connect with an assessor. So we'll have a pool of assessors that students can pick from in their area and have an on-farm assessment to really showcase their skills. It's not a training, it's to show that they're fully equipped and they have a high level of skill, and that accreditation will last for 3 years and can be automatically renewed if they complete 1,500 insems per year confirmed by their employer. So the next steps are to launch the NHIA Advanced Accreditation, to relaunch a semen and embryo handling, and the other thing that industry has asked us for, we've had a request for an AI symposium, similar to today, but for technicians to be up to date and get the latest information and networking. This has been a missing piece for our development of technicians, so we'll also be working on that. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good the training is if it's not easy to access, and this will make it very easy. So NHIA is driving the message for best practice in AI for our people and our cows, also promoting good animal welfare practice to set a good standard for industry in its deregulated environment. So that brings us to April's next part of what's also new and exciting in simulation training for artificial insemination.
Thanks, Sarah. So we take a little deviation for a moment here. Alongside the national project we've just spoken about that has been running the past couple of years and is now coming to fruition with this course that's available and the professional accreditation training, there was one area of that, I guess, developing that training that we still felt that we could improve on. We had it as best as we could get it at the time, but we really wanted to go to the next level, and that was with regard to animal ethics and the use of live animals for training purposes. And I guess we knew that from a social licence perspective, there was a real risk in the way that society viewed AI training, and their view that it was quite an invasive procedure to do. And we needed the live animals there to have that opportunity to train, but what was the opportunity that could be brought through simulation education? And so the opportunity that came in 2021 and 22 was to obtain a grant from the Victorian government, which we successfully obtained, and we partnered with the 3 TAFEs as well as NHIA to actually start to work on that grant and look at what simulation could do for us in starting to alleviate this demand that we have on live animals for training. And it was a demand that the TAFEs were really finding quite limiting in that it's quite financially costly to maintain a herd for live animal training or source a farm or a training facility that can provide it for you. And that was in addition to the social licence issues. So there's a lot of benefit to be had. But simulation education in agriculture is not widely used, surprisingly. It exists in pockets, I'll acknowledge, but the sophistication and the level of training that we needed to be able to deliver to replace the live animal aspect in some part was far sophisticated than what we had currently. And so what we've done is actually turned to the healthcare sector and looked at how health education has changed over the past sort of 30 or so years and how they've actually adopted simulation education to a point where it's used very prevalently. So with that in mind, I'll take us through, if you give some attention to this little video for a moment.
Hello, can you hear me? Are you able to sit up? So at the moment, we have a gas explosion at the university.
So this is a major incident exercise, and basically the students are confronted with more casualties than the normal amount of ambulances can deal with, and so they need to put an ambulance command structure in place. 1, 2, 3.
So that video was courtesy of Western Sydney University's paramedicine team, and that's how they train all their students, and what you just saw is a simulated outdoor classroom. But if you were to walk past that scenario just as a passerby at the university that day, you would have probably thought it looks pretty replicable of what that scenario could have looked like in real life. And that's the power of simulation education, I guess, if it's done right. And what we as an industry have the opportunity to really harness and develop in addressing some of the challenges we have with mimicking real life situations. But those paramedicine students aren't the only ones to have ever learnt in a simulated environment. And in fact, when you look at the medical industry, there was just over 3,500 graduates of medicine last year in Australia, and they made up that broader workforce of 642,000 health professionals. That includes those paramedicine students, it includes your GPs, your allied health professionals. Every single one of those people throughout their tertiary study and when they entered the workforce as part of their professional development have had simulation learning experiences. And in fact, for some of those people, some of the skills they learn in university, they only ever learn on simulation education resources and in simulated environments before they entered the workforce. For those of you here today that may have had medical procedures, there are some medical procedures you would have had that the person that operated or performed on you may have only ever learnt that on what could be perceived as a fake person and a fake environment. And I guess with that in mind, I'd really ask you to think about that scenario that the paramedicine students were in and think about simulation with the lens that it's not about the technology, it's not about a piece of equipment or a piece of plastic, it's actually a technique, and it's how we use those pieces of equipment and we actually bundle that together into a complete learning experience that replicates the real thing, but in a lot of cases can actually also amplify the situation. All of a sudden with simulation education, you have control over what you want the student to learn. And that's the real opportunity that's provided here, on top of overcoming some of those barriers around ethics and safety and things like that. But in healthcare, simulation never looked that sophisticated all the time. In fact, CPR models back in the 1970s were probably the most, I guess, known and familiar type of simulation education, and we've probably all had this experience in a room like this doing CPR training. And this was around the 70s, and it was probably, they couldn't get the technology quite sophisticated enough. So throughout the 80s and 90s, certainly human cadavers or bodies were used in education training for health students quite prevalently, and even into the early 2000s, I have memories of, my friends that are health practitioners doing their university studies on human bodies. But what started to happen in the early 2000s is that there was this call, I guess people were starting to call into question some of the values and moral and ethical challenges around using dead bodies for anatomy and physiology training. It was not quite sitting right with the society, and there was actually a social licence issue beginning to emerge. There was also issues around student safety and biosecurity that were starting to challenge the medical profession and education providers. And if nothing else, there was a real issue around access. There wasn't enough people donating their bodies to education and science to meet the demand of students who needed to train. And so it was in about 2005 then that there was this shift in education that happened for health professionals, and there was a big investment that happened and really launched forward what health education looked like in terms of simulation education, to the point now that these pictures on the right are what you would see in a standard university classroom. This is what students learn in. It looks like a hospital ward. It looks like a GP's surgery. It is, for all intensive purposes, the real thing. And so there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the healthcare system in what they've done and how we might apply that to what we can do in terms of training, particularly for AI. Because the challenges they faced are exactly the same as the challenges we face. We face ethical issues around using live animals for training, and particularly for invasive training, we find issues with safety and the idea of putting a novice student behind a 500 or 600 kilo cow and getting them to stick their hand in, if that's the first time they've ever done it. We face issues, as Debbie sort of talked about today, with FMD and biosecurity and the idea of bringing multiple students into one site. It's almost like a hothouse for contamination. And then the availability of animals, as I said earlier, the financial burden to the training facilities of having a live animal herd or sourcing live animals to do training. So what we've done in this project with simulation education and bringing it back, I'm not going to talk about healthcare for the rest of the session, you might be relieved to know, but with this particular grant, we've had the opportunity to look at how we might leverage that national curriculum that was built. So what Sara and I have talked about at the start with the online modules, with the new manual, with the practical training, How can we overlay and look at embedding some simulation learning into that to reduce the burden of needing to use live animals for the whole training process? Certainly the assessment component will still be live animals, but potentially we can reduce the number of animals we need available for practice by using simulation education. And so we've taken, I guess, a three-stage approach to the learning experience for simulation. And the first one is a very, very, I would say, a primitive sort of starting point. And what we are using is what we call a part task trainer. There's also a little bit more advanced one over on the NHIA table. But this piece of the learning journey, we're starting with anatomy. So we're assuming and we're saying that these students have done their online modules. They know the theory behind how AI works, but they haven't put it into practice. And the first step without overwhelming a student is to actually get them to understand, okay, what are all the parts and where do they go? You've read it on a page, but it means nothing until you see it in real life. And so we're about here with anatomy. But what this doesn't do is it doesn't give you a kinesthetic experience. It doesn't give you the touch and feel experience of what a reproductive tract actually feels like and the variability of it. So the next phase that students go into, and this is perhaps the most exciting piece of technology and where simulation for agriculture is really starting to come into its own a little bit. We're using haptics, which is basically a computer, it's a robotic-based technology that allows the student to put their hand in another half-sized cow, but this time it's not about the anatomy. They know where all the parts are, they know where they go and how they connect together. This is about giving them some sensation of what it feels like. So applying through the robot different pressures to give different sensations of what a uterus feels like or the tract feels like, so on. The other really cool thing about this is, as you can see, the computer screen there allows the trainer to actually see what the student is feeling. So if you've got someone putting their hand in a cow and saying, I'm feeling this part of the reproductive tract, in a live animal, you take their word for it. You have no way of seeing if that's actually correct. In this scenario, though, you can say, actually, no, you're touching the uterus or pelvis or whatever it might be. And you can recorrect that student and actually show them where they need to put their hand. Move your hand up, move your hand down, move it left or right, and then you're actually touching the part that I want you to touch. So in terms of the learning journey, they're building their knowledge. They know where things are, they know what they feel like. But we never AI half a cow in real life. So we have to put it all together. And putting it all together means a full-size cow. And this piece of simulation equipment is the whole shebang. It's the actual size, it's the full-size Holstein cow, but all of the reproductive tracts that go in it as well. And this is where the student has the opportunity to actually perform the AI procedure, but importantly get an understanding around spatial awareness. Because it's one thing to AI and practice AIing on half a cow on a table. It's very different when you get out in the race and you can't see over the back of the cow and you have no idea what her head's doing and how she's behaving at the front, and trying to get a sense of working in a confined environment of a race as opposed to having all the space in the world when you're practicing. So putting all of those pieces together, this is what the simulation learning experience can actually get students to a point where you can informally assess them for competency and say, yes, you're right to go and learn on a live cow. You have sufficient capability that both you're going to get the best out of that as a learning experience. You're not going to be poking around inside the cow and hoping for the best. And it's also the best outcome for the animal to have someone who half knows what they're doing rather than a complete novice putting their hand in a cow and, leaving it in there for a while and having a bit of a poke around. So this project, it is halfway through. It is embargoed at the moment, I should say as well, which is why I've told you as much as I can about it. It is due to finish at the end of this year with those 3 partner TAFEs piloting over the next few months, after which those TAFEs have that equipment on hand to deliver this course, and they will be leveraging, as I said, that national curriculum. So if you're fortunate enough to live in Victoria and want to do AI training, you have access to not only a really consistent and high quality national curriculum, but one that also has elements of simulation in it that can potentially enhance the learning experience for you even further. So I'll leave it at that. So I know that we're out of time and Graham's staring over my shoulder.
Thank you. That's great insights about how to bring that simulation experience to AI. There is a part-task simulation cow. Come have a touch, come have a feel, have a go. Carl Hockey has given it the tick of approval. He says it feels like the real thing. So come and have a look at it and come chat to me about the Learning Hub. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.